Hello and Assalamualaikum. Today in chapter 6, we will learn about analyzing the audience. Throughout the chapter, you will learn about audience centeredness, your classmates as an audience, demographic audience analysis, and situational audience analysis. Good public speakers are audience centered. They know the primary purpose of speech making is not to browbeat the audience or to blow off steam. Rather, it is to gain a desired response from listeners. To be audience centered, you need to keep several questions in mind when you work on your speeches. The first is, to whom am I speaking? Second is, what do I want them to know, believe, or do as a result of my speech? And finally, what is the most effective way of composing and presenting my speech to accomplish that aim? The answers to these questions will influence every decision you make along the way, includes selecting a topic, determining a specific purpose, settling on your main points and supporting materials, organizing the message, and finally, delivering the speech. Your classmates as an audience. Your speech class is a testing ground where you can develop your communication skills before applying them outside the classroom. The most serious measure of success or failure is your grade, and that is determined by your instructor. Each of your classmates is a real person with real ideas, attitudes, and feelings. Your speech class offers an enormous opportunity to inform and persuade these people. The best classroom speeches are those that take the classroom audience as seriously as a lawyer, a politician, a minister, or an advertiser that takes an audience. You should consider every audience, inside the classroom and out, as worthy of your best effort to communicate your knowledge or convictions. At the least, you show respect for your listeners. At the most, you could make a real difference in their lives. One of the ways speakers analyze audience is by looking at demographic traits such as age, religion, gender and sexual orientation, racial, ethnic, and cultural background, as well as group membership. This is called as demographic audience analysis. Let's look at it one by one, and we start with age. There is no generation in which everyone thinks alike, buys the same product, or votes for the same political candidates. Yet, each generation has more or less common values and experiences that set it apart from other generations. Whatever your age, you are a product of your world. Suppose you address an audience of older people. If you refer to Cardi B, your audience may have no idea who you mean. Similarly, if you speak to an audience of young adults and casually mention Watergate scandal, they may not know what you are talking about. Second demographic is religion. Current events around the world demonstrate that religious views are among the most emotionally charged and passionately defended of all human concerns. Even your small speech class might include a wide range of faith. You cannot assume that your views on religion, whatever they may be, are shared by your listeners. Third is racial, ethnic, and cultural background. Now we live in an age of globalization. You may find yourself addressing listeners from countries other than your own. This is one reason why employers identify the ability to communicate effectively with people of different cultural backgrounds as one of the most desirable skills for college graduates. Regardless of where you are speaking, be aware that some of your listeners may have racial, ethnic, or cultural perspectives that will affect their attitudes toward your speech. Try to gauge what those perspectives are and how they will be likely to affect the audience's response to your message. Fourth is gender and sexual orientation. Just as attitudes about race and ethnicity are different from what they were even a few decades ago, Attitudes about gender and sexual orientation have also changed. A generation ago, standard advice for beginning public speakers was to be wary of pigeonholing listeners into stereotypical gender roles. That is still good advice. If you're delivering a speech about small businesses, for example, and you refer to business owners generically as he, or to all shoppers as she, your word choice will doubtless lead more than a few listeners to raise their eyebrows. Always. So, speakers who fail to take account of current gender attitudes are almost certain to provoke negative reactions among some listeners, male and female alike. The same goes for attitudes about sexual orientation. Workers belong to unions. Business people to chambers of commerce. Similar groups abound on campus. Some of your classmates may belong to the drama society, some to the soccer club, some to the chess club, and so forth. For speeches in the classroom as well as for those outside the classroom, the group affiliations of your audience may provide excellent clues about your listeners' interests and attitudes. Now let's move to situational audience analysis. Usually built on demographic analysis, it identifies traits of the audience unique to the speaking situation at hand. These traits include the size of the audience, the physical setting, and the disposition of the audience toward the topic, the speaker, and the occasion. Outside the classroom, the size of an audience can, with the aid of television and radio, range in the millions. Most speech classes, however, consist of between 20 and 30 people, a small to medium sized audience. This is a good size for beginning speakers, most of whom are terrified at the prospect of addressing a huge crowd. As you gain more experience, though, you may welcome the challenge of speaking to larger groups. Some speakers actually prefer a large audience to a small one. No matter what size group you are addressing, bear in mind one basic principle. The larger the audience, the more formal your presentation must be. Audience size may also affect your language, choice of appeals, and the use of visual aids. When you face any speaking situation, it is important to know in advance if there will be any difficulties with the physical setting. For classroom speeches, of course, you already do know, but speeches outside the classroom can present unpleasant surprises unless you do your homework beforehand. When you are invited to speak, don't be shy about asking questions of the person who arranged the speech. If possible, look over the room a few days in advance, or else arrive early on the day of your speech to inspect the room. If it's too warm or too cold, see about adjusting the thermostat. Check the seating arrangement and location of the podium to be sure your audience can see you. In short, do everything you can to control the influence of physical setting on your audience. As we saw in chapter 5, you should keep your audience in mind when choosing a topic. Ideally, you will pick a topic that suits them as well as it suits you. Once you have your topic, however, you must consider in more detail their interest in the topic, knowledge about it, and attitudes toward it. The more competent listeners believe a speaker to be, the more likely they are to accept what he or she says. Likewise, the more listeners believe that a speaker has their best interest at heart, the more likely they are to respond positively to the speaker's message. No matter what the situation, listeners have fairly definite ideas about the speeches they consider appropriate. Take Veterans Day as an example. It was understood by the audience to be a respectful occasion that focused on service and sacrifice. The last thing anyone expected to hear was a political speech. Speakers who seriously violate these expectations can almost always count on infuriating the audience. Perhaps most important, the occasion will dictate how long a speech should be. When you are invited to speak, the chairperson will usually say how much time you have for your talk. If not sure, go and ask. To sum up our topic for today, good speakers are audience centered. They know that the aim of speech making is to gain a desired response from listeners. The first stage in learning about your audience is to identify demographic traits. The second stage is identifying traits of the audience unique to the speaking situation. Once you completed the audience analysis, you must adapt your speech so it will be clear and convincing to your listeners. Put yourself in their place. Try to hear the speech as they will. Anticipate questions and objections and try to answer them in advance. When you deliver your speech, keep an eye out for audience feedback and adjust your remarks in response.